Um, Hello everybody, it's very nice to see you all. It's always a bit of a problem having a conversation with people who've been sat listening to various brilliant contributions from others who have always said everything that you want to say, and it's always a particular issue having a conversation after you've had Michael on the stage because he explodes in a kind of, I don't know, a sort of concatenation of enthusiasm about the possibility of technological change. I find it deeply inspiring actually, and I like to be surrounded by people who have some level of optimism about what is possible to do in the world. But I want to take a little bit of a different tack, I think. One of the things that wasn't on Michael's list was actually the list around diplomacy, the list around what international leadership means and how it's possible to use our skills and assets to try to shape a world in which we're making the kind of environmental progress that we want to, but also creating the substrate, if you like, for some of these innovations to work for us in the UK at a kind of economic level. And I want to start by doing that in a funny place. I want to start by getting people to think about why it is that environmentalists have this kind of slightly contrary relationship between the local and the international. Nearly all of us start from a place of loving place, of loving community, of looking for solutions that are locally grounded. And yet the reality is that there are very, very few environmentalists who don't also have an international perspective. That's often criticised. It's often seen as a desire in some way or another to try to kind of impose large-scale international frameworks and solutions on things, a kind of collection of the ideas and philosophies of the citizens of nowhere. But the reality is that internationalism amongst environmentalists is not to do with politics, actually, or even philosophy. It's really to do with natural sciences. And I think you have to remember that most of us who work in the environmental movement, I'm sure many of the people in this room, have a background of working and living in an understanding of biology or understanding of physics and earth chemistry. And so we tend to understand the biosphere that we live in and the atmosphere as being a single organ, something akin to the way that the human skin is a single organ. If you affect it in one place, the chances are that it will be affected in another. We are internationalists through our comprehensive understanding of the way in which the natural world is connected across the globe. And that, I think, is the other side of the picture of innovation and excitement that Michael's pointing to. So what is it that we can do collectively as global leaders in the UK that will enable us to protect that common skin and build the kinds of relationships of solidarity that lets us do that, whilst at the same time shaping the economic conditions in which we can make the most possible benefit from the sorts of innovation that Michael's talking about? I think there are three things that we need to do in order to be able to approach that sensibly. The first is that actually you really can't play an international role and you can't play a role as a market leader if you don't actually have domestic systems of decent governance, sensible regulation, and a sense of trust. You need to be seen to be doing what you're advocating to others in your backyard, but you also need a sensible regulatory environment that drives the sort of innovation that Michael was talking about that then enables you to speak into the outside world. That's why when Tony Juniper was talking earlier on about the need to have some kind of legal underpinning of the 25-year plan, he was talking actually to me about what the foundations of UK leadership would be in the global environment and what would be necessary for us to be able to be the innovative economy that we were talking about earlier. So that's number one, domestic systems of governance, trust and stability. The second thing that we need above all is to build solidarity in our trading relationships. Because actually it's necessary that if we're going to drive in this direction, we build the markets around us that are both capable of buying the products we want to sell, but also avoiding the possibility that during this process of innovation, what happens is that we import cheap, dirty products that undercut the very businesses that we're attempting to support on the route that Michael was painting earlier. And so trade policy in this country is essential, both to be able to achieve what it is that we want at the global scale, but also to ensure that we have the kind of level playing field and the sort of community of nations that mean we're building in a positive and not a negative direction. And I think, I just draw your attention to the fact that even now, even before we're having this conversation about what new trade relationships we might enter into, we have a kind of global land footprint as a result of the import of products into the UK, which was estimated by the RSPB and WWF to be about 60 16.3 million hectares of land conversion as a result of the importation of products like soy, like cocoa, like palm oil. We need to take an approach to trade that actively and specifically reduces the global environmental footprint of this country elsewhere if we want to be taken seriously as a leader and if we want to create the kind of markets that mean that our high-quality products are sold into that environment. So that's number 2, trade. How do we do that? Number 3 is diplomacy. Because actually there's something really critical about working with others to create a rules-based environment, to create the kind of situation in which people trust each other to be able to take action towards a common goal. It was diplomacy that got us to the point where we signed the Paris Agreement on climate change. And that really matters because it gives every single country that is moving in this direction some level of confidence that we have a common approach to where we're going, and some sense that our future is not going to be endlessly undercut by countries using the opportunity to go off in a kind of rogue Mad Max way to undermine the overall direction of travel. So the other thing we really need is diplomacy. Domestic credibility and governance, trade rules which build solidarity, and an absolute investment in environmental diplomacy are the conditions for global leadership, in my view. Now, I just, again, don't want to rerun the referendum, but I would like to point out that actually the European Union, for many environmentalists, represent a kind of ready-made template for doing a lot of the things that I've just described. It had a very strong and stable governance system. It was a very large trading bloc with broadly high environmental standards, and it operated as an incredibly powerful force in international agreements. That does not mean that I think that everything that the EU ever did in those circumstances was the best that it could ever be. And I'm entirely with Michael in thinking that one of the things that we can be proudest about in our country is our commitment to phase out coal. And that is something that we are doing over and above and ahead of the European Union. I also think that the opportunity to reform farming policy represents an extraordinary potential contribution to the global effort to protect our environment. But we cannot do it without those things. Strong domestic governance, really strong relationships with our trading partners that are founded on the idea of environmental progress, and an investment in that notion of environmental diplomacy. The test for me is going to be whether or not we've managed to build the relationships we need at a trade level and at an international diplomatic level by 2020, when there will be a series of global meetings to try to work out how we address the crisis that Tony was talking about earlier, the extinction crisis, which is now bundled up with the crisis of climate change. By that point, we need to start to build the kinds of trade relationships or conversations and the kinds of diplomatic relationships that mean that we can walk tall in the international arena. And people will take us seriously because they realize that we understand the art of global environmental change, as well as the science of the kinds of standards and innovation and products that we would need to put in place in order to be able to get to the sort of future that Michael was painting. So I hope that that's the nature of the conversation that we can have in this session, is to think about what real leadership leads in the international community, and to understand that that is about us shaping a world, not just about the kinds of innovation that we can achieve through business, though that's terribly important. Thanks very much. Now, those were two little bits of hors d'oeuvre, but the main course today is James Thornton, who's the Chief Executive of the absolutely excellent and increasingly influential charity Client Earth. I'm not going to give you any further introduction because James doesn't need it. I'll just invite him onto the platform. Thanks very much.